Hi everyone, Derived Energy here. Today I'll be making a response video to Professor Anton, who made a response video to Liam. So without further ado, let's kick this show on the road.
You say you have a choice whether or not to have children. No, you don't. This is something that you'll have to negotiate with a woman. You're going to have a discussion with another person, and you don't get to make that choice. In some way, it's more than up to you. It may be up to her, it may be up to both of you. You say before you have a child.
Yeah, so it would be up to both the people, but nobody's putting a gun to your head and saying you have to have a child. You know, if you contribute the sperm or the egg to producing a baby, then you're morally accountable for that action. You can't just say, well, if you're in a relationship and the other partner wants a child and you don't, then you have to have the child. You know, if you don't want to have a child, then that should be these sorts of things should be discussed thoroughly, you know, before the relationship gets serious, so that both parties know where they stand. And if your partner wants to have children, then it's unreasonable of them to expect you to have a child just because they want to have a child.
There is no way to ask it if it wants to live. Well, right. And that means there's no way for it to tell you that it's willing to take the risk. You make it seem like the child would hear the risk and then say, well, geez, I don't want the risk at all. But maybe it would say, I'll risk it. I know lots of people who are risky. I know lots of people who are very happy with life. Now you're going to say, well, that doesn't really matter. But the number of people who want to live forever, the number of people who want to live longer, really shows you that there's a number of people out there who don't think it would have been better not to have been.
What does that matter? Well, that shows that people are irrational when it comes to existential thinking, and they think they were deprived in some way, so therefore their current sentience bestows an advantage over the absence of sentience, which clearly it doesn't. That would be an absurdity. You know, so people, when they say they're glad that they were born, they're not using rational thinking, you know. So that argument falls down. And what's this talk of risk? I mean, if there's a risk, if you take a risk, there's a chance that it could pay off. But what can pay off if you come into life? In an absence of sentience, there's nobody who needs anything. There's no motivation to come into existence for your own sake. There's no deprivation and there's no suffering. And guess what, Professor Anton? Life contains both deprivation and pain and suffering. And it also ensures and guarantees a certain death. So it's not a risk, it's accepting a death sentence with something to experience things in life, or to have a stab at experiencing things in life that nobody requires before they're born. So it's an imposition, and just because perhaps the majority of people would prefer to have are glad that they were born, their faulty reasoning leads them to make this conclusion, because they're seeing that the time before their death with an aghast, you know, they're aghast, oh, death, you know, oh, no, I wasn't alive, that's so scary. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
You say, number 4, having a child means you have voluntarily forced life onto a new separate entity without its consent. Okay, correct. But
yes, correct.
You also didn't get an opportunity to ask it, so it seemed like a force. But if the child would have been consulted, you don't know that it wouldn't have said, please speak on my behalf. It has no one else to speak on its behalf. And so,
well, if it did have someone to if you could ask somebody before they came into existence, if they wanted to come into existence, then they'd have no rational reason to want to come into existence, because they're non-existent. There's no deprivation of happiness or a futile pursuit for meaning that terminates in oblivion anyway. You know, Homo sapiens have such a overestimated perspective of their own meaningfulness and importance in the grand scheme of things. I mean, we're just like eddies, ephemeral eddies in the flow of life, you know, and we're subject to all kind of harsh contingencies, and we all go to oblivion. That's the end goal of that's what happens to every single living organism that has ever lived. Oblivion. So they're just going they're just coming out of oblivion, and then they're going back to oblivion. Now, you know, that is futile. That entails experiencing suffering and deprivation. It's just an absurd comedy what is happening on this planet. Sentience is a curse. It doesn't matter if people think it's a gift. It doesn't dismantle the logical arguments that, I mean, on the planet Mars there's no deprivation of happiness or a pursuit for meaning, and there's no pain, suffering or death. There's absolutely no way you can improve that state of affairs. There's no way it's inadequate in any way. It's just people with a life bias using irrational reasoning, you know, to justify making a blood sacrifice to the human race.
So because of that, you could call it an imposition, but in some way it was a delegated duty from someone who can't speak on their own behalf. And you had the responsibility and the risk to try to decide whether or not that was a risk worth taking.
Now, it's not a risk worth taking. It's not even a risk. As I say, it's a guaranteed death sentence. And they've got nothing to... There's nobody who's got anything to gain. It's people who exist who are able to do all this reckoning of gain and loss. You know, it's not the energy that is circulating in the universe that can, due to people's actions on this planet, be reconfigured in such a way as to create a sentient, self-reflexive manifestation of energy in an amoral and meaningless universe.
You say...
And so, you know, the value of not having children can be appreciated by people not procreating. They can see, they can appreciate, and they can value the fact that they could have created a sentient being who would suffer and die and experience deprivation, or they could decide to abstain from procreation. So that the value comes from realizing that you're not adding to the amount of corpses that will fall on this planet when there's absolutely no meaning to it, you know, outside of what people's subjective experiences can fabricate in their minds.
There is a small but statistically significant risk that the child's life will not be worth living. The child will wish it had never been born. Okay, a small but statistically significant. What's your data there? I want to see some hard data on the actual percentage of number of people, compared to the number of people who've been. Give me the number of people who say that, and then we'll try to get to some argument about whether or not people really would, if you could ask them and then say, are you glad that your parents spoke on your behalf? Because you couldn't speak, aren't you glad that they gave voice to an option for you that you would have been denied had they not given birth?
Would have been denied, so would have been deprived, but you can't deprive anybody if you don't bring them into existence. There's no deprivation of happiness or a futile pursuit for meaning on the planet Mars. So when you use the word deny, you're sort of implying some kind of deprivational state, you know, prior to bringing somebody into existence. So Professor, you're just completely irrational in this, and you're just telling people what they want to hear.
Okay, and then you say there is no way in this instant for the child to, quote, get a refund or reverse the sum.
Well, I'm just going to end the video there because I think I've made the point. and points.